Another month, another headphone. The never-ending train of audio products continues even into the dimming days of 2020. Just as we started 2020 on a shaky note, we might as well end on it, too. I'm talking about the Blon BL-30, an over-the-ear headphone that was very recently released. This headphone has gotten some traction. I bought the BL-30 from Linsol. It took nearly 2 months for the order to ship and arrive. The BL-30 is around $110. Is this headphone a bargain? Blon, as far as I know, does not have its own website. We have to rely upon Linsol and other sellers to tell us what the BL-30 is supposed to do. According to Linsol, the BL-30 is, quote, a loudspeaker. Not a headphone or speakerphone, a loudspeaker. The marketing seems enamored by the simplistic design, going as far as to claim that the raw steel color presents a modern look, which the stretchable headphone adds a flavor of vintage like the antenna. If you're confused with this comment, you're not the only one. I have no idea what they're talking about. The marketing is bold enough to make the following claims. First, the BL-30 really excels most headsets with its more balanced low, medium, and high frequency and broader soundstage. Second, the headphone provides rich and favorable sound. Third, the headphone is unique and based on friendly using experience. Again, terrible usage of English. Let's be clear about a few things. Blon's marketing strategy is to purposefully misspell in English and to purposefully use nonsensical, Dadaistic statements. You have very little idea what the BL-30 is supposed to do. The statement that the BL-30 excels most headphones is obvious hyperbole and should not be taken seriously. The only information that you can glean is that the BL-30 is supposed to have a balanced sound signature and that it is comfortable, according to Blon. The BL-30 is part metal and part plastic. A good portion of the headphone is of metal for better or worse. My first impression was amazement at the metal build of the ear cups. They are solid and heavy. Headband adjustment is done with vertical poles that have notches. They seem stiff enough to not accidentally change. The headband is covered with some of the cheapest padding I have ever seen. I have purchased similar padding for around $7 on Amazon, and even then it was overpriced. Underneath the padding is a single curved strip of steel. It is thin but fairly strong. Most of the headphone can be dismantled. You can separate the ear pads, the driver housing, the yokes, and the headband. The BL-30 comes with a very pleasant cable. This cable is covered in soft cloth, and the terminators are made of metal. In the hand, the BL-30 gives a very positive impression. Unfortunately, that's where the positivity ends. The BL-30 is one of the worst constructed headphones at any price that I have seen. The ear cups swivel round and round and round and flip upside down. I hate the monolith M1060 ear cups for similar reasons, and there is literally no reason for such foolish construction on the BL-30. The height adjustment poles are not securely fastened to the ear cups. Over just a few minutes, they become loose, and I had to constantly tighten them. Clearly, the screw and washer holding the poles in place are insufficient. The problem gets much, much worse as soon as you put the headphones on your head. You will immediately notice that the BL-30 does not seal around your ears. Whether you wear them at the shortest or longest height, the bottom of the ear cups never make contact with your head. Instead, you feel as if all the weight of the headphone is on the top of your head and the top portion of the ear cups make contact with your face while the bottom portion of the ear cups are a few millimeters away. This is a complaint that many, if not all, users of the BL-30 have made. There are a few fixes for this problem. You can bend the headband aggressively inward to cause a sharp angle towards your head. You can also purchase angled ear pads to make a seal. I ended up using both methods. I first tried using some ZMF and audeze angled ear pads. Those still did not make full contact with my head. Severely bending the headband helps, but the stock ear pads do not make a full seal. Adding angled pads to the bent headband provides the best seal. There is no other workaround. I checked for hours whether compatible headbands could be purchased. I could not find any alternative headbands. The problem, frankly, is the ear cups. The ear cups hit the yokes and are restricted into a 90-degree limit. Our faces and heads are not 90 degrees. We all have varying curves, and the ear cups should contour to us. A straight angle up and down means that some portion of the ear pads will never achieve contact. This is fundamental, basic, grade school level common sense, yet Blon royally screwed this up. There is no mincing words about this. Blon utterly destroyed the headphone with the headband and yoke design. Overall, the construction, that is the use of components, is fine. The headphones are weighty and I appreciate the generous use of metal. However, the full picture shows a haphazard, slipshod, blind use of components. Blon has the tenacity to claim that users will have, quote, no worries about fitting issues. This is a lie. The BL-30 does not fit, and in order to make them fit, you will have to apply a tremendous amount of force to the headband to curve it. And if you want the best seal you can achieve, you will need to use a thick, angled ear pad. Imagine having bent the headband, then getting a passable fit, listening to the BL-30 and not liking it. What chances do you think you have of getting a return and refund with the headband bent? I don't want to belabor the point. The total package is one of the, if not the, worst headphones in build and fit. The BL-30 is a shameful display of incomplete design and deceitful marketing. If I gave scores in each category, then I would give the BL-30 a whopping 2 out of 5 for fit and build. In order to test the BL-30 properly, I bent the headband. This required a lot of time, patience, and muscle. Even though I got the best seal with an audeze or ZMF earpad, I decided to keep things in stock configuration as much as possible because, as we know, changing earpads also changes the sound signature. Consequently, other than bending the headband, I changed no other aspect of the BL-30. I connected the headphone to my RME ADI2 DAC and Low2 PAW S1. The RME and S1 are perfectly neutral amp DACs. The S1 has the benefit of several EQ presets that I will test on the BL-30. I played songs through Amazon Music HD. The BL-30 seems to require a bit of power. On the RME, I had to turn volume up to negative 23 decibels to get the BL-30 to a loud listening level. On the PAW S1, I had to use high gain and was at 80 out of 100 volume steps. Blon really doesn't say what the bass response is supposed to be on the BL-30, but after extensive listening, I can say it is mid-bass heavy and muddy. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the song starts with a sub-bass rumble. That detail should be audible immediately. On the BL-30, the rumble became apparent at 10 seconds into the track. The rumble was a bit distorted and had slow transients. I do not think it was rolled off, but it lacked clarity and detail. At the middle of the song, there is a crescendo when the organ and all other instruments play at maximum. The BL-30 recreated the organ, but it did not cut through the other instruments like it usually does on other headphones. There was significant melding among all instruments. The rolling thunder effect was clearly audible, but thick and verging on distortion. The BL-30 created a potpourri of sounds that were hard to distinguish. In Conquer by Overwork, there is a rolling marble effect at the beginning of the song. This element is supposed to pan from right to left to center. On the BL-30, the rolling marble sound was muffled and recessed. The BL-30 did not pan the sound whatsoever. Indeed, the decay was so slow that the effect just lingered instead of actually fading to allow the next sound to appear clearly. There are several drums in this track, and the BL-30 did recreate all of them. There was significant melding between each type of drum, but I could not hear any distortion. All drums sounded blunted, as if someone had draped a thick sheet over the drum head. Drum impacts lacked the sharp energy that is usually associated with them. The synth in this track was not fatiguing and was rather easy on the ears. I listened to several hip-hop tracks including Pure Water, Nupatek, Reel It In, and Uproar. Each of these songs is supposed to have a subwoofer effect. The BL-30 recreated that detail, though it seemed a little recessed and melded heavily with mid-bass. vocals were easily 2 steps ahead of all the other elements. Vocals retained their characteristic sparkle without becoming harsh or peaky. I repeated each track several times at different volumes. I wanted to test out if there was different performance at various volume levels, and unfortunately, the BL-30 was consistent. In every song, on every occasion, at every volume setting, the BL-30 made the bass sound like a sheet was draped over the speaker, which then absorbed some of the bass energy and clarity. Overall, the bass is present. It is what some might call thick bass. It is undefined, unrefined, and undetailed. There is significant melding between sub-bass and mid-bass. Bass and mids, however, seem to maintain separation. This means that vocals are generally ahead and fairly clear in comparison. Some might say that the BL-30's bass response is unique because of the open back design. There is some truth to that, but the bass is nothing spectacular. And frankly, there are other open back headphones that have elevated bass response but with more clarity and detail than what the BL-30 provides. The Bass Audio G12 is just one example. Mids are forward, fairly smooth, and tend to retain a natural tonality. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, the track has natural grain and sibilance. The BL-30 presented the sibilance fairly accurately, without accentuating or de-emphasizing it. The grain was audible, but a bit smoother than what it should have been. The primary vocalist was easily 2 steps ahead of the other instruments. The drums and guitars had longer than typical decay, resulting in heavy melding among them. However, the timbre and tonality was accurate. When the backup vocalist appeared near the end of the song, she was audible in the right ear cup, though her voice melded significantly with the other instruments. In Want You Back by Haim, the BL-30 accurately portrayed the sibilance of the primary vocalist. It was neither elevated nor rolled off. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer emphasizes the word "we" and it sounds a bit gravelly. The BL-30 muffled some of that particular detail. The 2 backup vocalists sounded fairly clear when they first appeared in the song. One was in the left ear cup, the other in the right. They retained their individual tonalities, though it was a little difficult to differentiate them. When the entire mix played at maximum, the backup vocalist melded into one voice. The primary vocalist was 2 steps ahead of the other instruments at all times. The guitars, piano, and drums had natural timbre but fairly long decay. This resulted in heavy melding and a lack of detail and resolution of each instrument. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the BL-30 recreated the ukulele and guitar with accurate timbre. The bass was audible and a bit muddy. There was significant melding among instruments, though no distortion. The primary vocalist was 2 steps ahead of the instruments, and his voice was smooth. There is a backup vocalist in the song, but the BL-30 did not present him. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds in the song, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breaths. The BL-30 rendered those breaths quite muffled. Overall, the mids favor vocals. That is, vocalists are usually well ahead of other instruments. They are clear and smooth. Guitars, pianos, bass, drums, all of these instruments have longer decay than they should. This results in melding and a lack of clarity among the instruments. I must point out that vocals seem to save the BL-30 from being a completely muddy experience. The forward nature and clarity in voices is immediately different from the muddiness and veiled sound that pervades the instruments. Treble is rolled off and lacks energy and clarity. Some might call this gentle. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the BL-30 melded all instruments all the time. The brass and horns cut through the mix, but lacked their characteristic energy and clarity. The gravelly, nasally sound of these instruments was muffled or missing, which is hardly an accurate representation of the music. I could not hear individual instruments, and all group sets sounded distant. That is, every instrument group set was shoulder to shoulder. Some headphones have depth and verticality in presentation, which allows you to hear some group sets closer than others. The BL-30 has no such ability. All sounds interacted together, and there was no sense of distance or depth or verticality. The BL-30 presented a stereo sound. That is, everything was left or right, and there was no sense of a 3D or holographic experience. If you're new to the audiophile world, basically what I'm saying is that the BL-30 does not make you feel as if you're sitting in the middle of the orchestra. Instead, it makes you feel as if you're listening to small bookshelf speakers. In Flight from the City by Johan Johansson, the BL-30 made the piano sound as if it was about 5 feet away from me. The bassier notes were distorted. The higher-pitched notes seemed overly accentuated, almost like I was listening to the piano inside a metal shipping container. The reverberation and decay was much longer than natural, causing significant melding and some distortion. The cello melded heavily with the piano, and it was not clear. I could hear the electric buzz effect, but not consistently. When that detail was elevated in the song, it was audible. But when that detail was layered beneath other instruments, the BL-30 could not render it. I could hear some of the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and some of the sound of the cello's weight being shifted. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the BL-30 recreated the piano in the right ear cup, the drum kit in the left, the saxophone dead center, and bass somewhere in the mix. All instruments melded. The saxophone was smooth and seemed to lack some energy. Even at high volume, I could not get the saxophone to sound peaky or harsh. Timbre seemed correct for all instruments. Decay was fairly long, however. Overall, treble response is a mixed bag. On the one hand, if you are sensitive to treble, then the BL-30's presentation might be pleasing to you. On the other hand, if you like clarity, then the BL-30 will be very disappointing. Instruments meld all the time. Combine that with the loss of treble energy and you are left with a sound signature that just feels like it is missing treble. This, of course, is not entirely true. The BL-30 does recreate treble frequency, but the roll-off, melding, and distortion result in a somewhat muddy sound. The worst part, I think, is the BL-30's rendition of pianos. When the piano is an integral element of a song, either the primary instrument or is emphasized in the original recording, the BL-30 makes it sound both tinny and distorted. Higher-pitched piano notes sound like they are resonating from inside a steel container. Lower-pitched bassy notes meld heavily and cause some distortion. Throughout this test, I have tried to explain the details I could hear with the BL-30. In this section, I will merely summarize. The BL-30 is average at best in detail retrieval. Obvious details are audible, but any detail that is layered, the BL-30 will struggle to present. The long decay of instruments tends to cause melding, which then contributes to muddy sound, which results in loss of resolution and detail. I could hear the electric buzz detail, breathing of artists, creaking of wood, and sometimes the gravelly emphasis of a vocalist, but on every occasion the details I heard were recessed or muffled. Some details were entirely missing. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details including the sound of children, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Focal Clear has the highest number of footsteps in this test. It presents 18. The Austrian Audio Hi-X55 is the next best, presenting 14 to 15. The Sennheiser HD6XX, 660S, and audeze LCD1 each presents 6 to 7. The Sennheiser HD560S presents 5 to 6. And the Blon BL-30 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The first footstep at 11 seconds into the song was obvious. The two immediately after, in the left ear cup, were easily audible, but each subsequent footstep from there was harder to distinguish. This is a fair approximation of what I heard during my listening tests. The BL-30 will present obvious details and everything else will be a struggle. The BL-30 has about average soundstage for an open back headphone. It is neither claustrophobic nor wide. Indeed, I have heard far greater soundstage on close-back headphones like the Hi-X55. The BL-30 is on par with the LCD1, HD6XX, and 660S regarding soundstage. The BL-30 has less soundstage than the Aventone Planar, Hi-Fi Man Sundara, and is a far cry from the Hi-Fi Man Diva. Throughout my many hours of listening, I could tell that the headphone is capable of greater soundstage, except for the melding and muddiness. I suspect that if Blon had implemented clarity in the sound signature, the BL30 would likely nip at the Sundara's heels. Unfortunately, the BL30's muddiness keeps the soundstage restrained. The sound performance I spoke of previously was mostly with the RME. However, since the RME does not have EQ presets, I decided to listen to the BL30 again through the low 2-paw S1 and use the S1's EQ presets. I listened to my test playlist again and can make the following general comments about the BL30's performance while on EQ. All but 2 of the S1's numerous presets had an audible effect on the BL30. The far field and near field presets were identical to each other, and frankly, that has been my experience on every headphone and IEM that I have used with these 2 presets. I cannot tell you whether you will like EQ application on the BL30, but I can say that every single preset on the S1 made the BL30 muddier or the vocals thinner. The full bass preset, for example, significantly affected the mids, causing all mids to become recessed. The bass was elevated and became quite boomy due to the BL30's already muddy bass response. Obviously, a lot of this is due to the S1. Presets work until they don't work. Each headphone will perform differently because of the music, source, listener, and particular EQ parameters, along with the original headphone's tuning. I cannot say that the BL30 will always perform the way it performs on the S1. Nor can I say that your BL30 will perform in this manner with your S1. Your choice of music is going to affect what you hear. The bottom line is that the BL30 does tend to respond to EQ, but the BL30's overall performance does not do it favors when presets are used. I gather that Blon is trying to market the BL30 as a balanced sounding headphone. There are various representations of balanced sound. For example, the Monolith M1070 and M1570, Sifka Phoenix, Bass Audio G12, Gold Planar GL1000, and the audeze LCD2 are all balanced sounding headphones, but they all have different characters. In my view, balanced sound signature is one which has elevated bass, natural and full mids, and slightly elevated treble. Instruments should be clear and vocals should not sound harsh or sibilant. The BL30 somewhat fits this definition. The bass is elevated. Sub-bass is probably close to neutral, but mid-bass is emphasized. There is a great amount of melding in the bass region. Vocals stand out and are generally smooth and clear from other elements. Instruments usually tend to have natural timbre. Pianos tend to suffer and sound tinny with high notes and sound distorted with low ones. Treble is rolled off, causing a lack of full energy in some instruments. It is not up to me to decide if this is a good or bad sound signature, but this is the sound. There are 3 noteworthy aspects of the BL30 sound, 3 aspects that are praiseworthy, in my opinion. First, the bass is rather full. For an open-back headphone, this is respectable performance. However, the lack of bass clarity and separation may have a negative effect on your listening experience. Second, vocals are usually clear and forward. I listened to many pop, hip-hop, folk, and rock tracks. Vocals sounded full and natural on each one, and they were always smooth. Third, treble is very, very pleasant. And by pleasant, I mean inoffensive. If you like treble clarity and power, then you will not like this sound signature. But if you listen to music at high volume or are sensitive to treble, then the BL30 might be the right fit. I think the best way to look at the BL30 is to consider it in the same family as, say, the Koss Porta Pro and the KPH30i, and similar to the Philips L2 and M1 Mark II. All of these other headphones have thick bass with full mids, but all of them also have at least the same, if not greater, clarity as the BL30, and I believe all of them have more accurate treble presentation than what you get on the BL30. There is no doubt that the BL-30 will require modification. You simply cannot escape this fact. The headband is part of the problem. The yoke design is the next issue. The ear pads are perfectly agreeable, but they do not sit flush on the side of your head. The only way to get close to a natural fit is to aggressively bend the headband. I read one hifi post that someone bent their headband straight, and I tried that, but it didn't help whatsoever for me. Instead, I had to bend the headband about 25 or 30 degrees inward towards the head. This bend was made close to the point where the ear cups connect to the headband. This allows the stock ear pads to sit much closer to the bottom of your ears, resulting in better seal. This causes 3 major pressure points all along the headband. The next modification I tried was using alternative ear pads. I could not find comparable angled ear pads. However, I had a spare set of ZMF Ori ear pads. These are impossible to fit inside the trench where the stock ear pads sit. Consequently, I had to stretch the ZMF ear pads over the ear cups. This was a tight fit, but it didn't work. The combination of bending the headband and using angled ear pads resulted in the best seal I could get. You could use audeze ear pads instead of ZMF. There are a few issues here, however. First, both ZMF and audeze ear pads are very expensive. Second, the ZMF ear pads have a leather flap that can slip over the BL-30's ear cups, but you will need to stretch and apply a lot of force to get these pads to fit. Third, audeze ear pads use adhesive to attach. They do not have a leather flap like the ZMF ear pads. The audeze ear pads have openings that are wide enough to cover the entire driver itself. But there are a few millimeters of the driver housing that is not covered. You can fix this by applying gaffer's tape over the ear pads and ear cup housing. The cheapest option I found were the Dakoni Elite Velour ear pads for audeze headphones. This particular ear pad is currently sold for around $40 plus shipping and tax, though all other variants seem to be around $60 to $70 from Dakoni. I found 2 audeze ear pad alternatives on Amazon. They are both around $40. These fit the same as actual audeze ear pads. However, both are in solid leather only. The headband pressure is the next issue that must be addressed. Bending the headband exasperates the discomfort, but the discomfort was present from the beginning anyway. The stock headband padding is lackluster and insufficient. Indeed, the stock padding is not capable of providing a cushion for the BL-30's weight. You can try to find any number of thicker headband padding. I used the Dakoni Nuggets. I put 2 of them on the headband, and this resulted in noticeable improvement. The pressure points from the Nuggets are obvious, but I find them to be more bearable than what I felt through the stock configuration. There's clearly no cost to bending the headband, except you cannot return your headphones since you've essentially deformed them. Angled ear pads will cost you anywhere between $40 and $70. Dakoni Nuggets cost between $20 and $30, depending on where you get them. In short, you'll need to spend an additional $60 to $100 for accessories to make the BL-30 fit and feel more comfortable. Don't forget to add that price into your budget as you're buying this headphone. I have reviewed Blon products before. I tested the BL-03 and 05. I found both to be subpar products and noted the numerous issues with them. Look, I am not a fan of Blon. I am not shy about saying this since it needs to be said. Maybe you consider this a bias. I, however, see it as an honest impression of a subpar company. Blon has in the past made uncomfortable IEMs packaged with trash accessories, resulting in people having to spend more money to get the products to fit. Whenever I brought up this inconvenient fact, Blon defenders said Blon still offers good value because the IEMs provide good sound for cheap. That, I think, is true bias. When your own affection for the sound signature causes you to ignore the numerous faults of a product, then you are not being fair or impartial. You are using your emotional reaction to justify a purchase. That's your prerogative, but it is not your prerogative to force anybody else to agree with you. The BL-30 is a Blon product through and through. The fit and finish is laughably bad. The headphones feel somewhat sturdy at first, but you quickly start noticing all the stupid design choices. The headband is uncomfortable. The yoke hits the ear cuff's housing, preventing the ear cuffs from reaching anything more than a 90-degree angle. The ear cuffs do not sit flush with your head. The so-called protective case is complete garbage. Mine arrived dented on top and the zipper broken. Clearly, this case is not specific to the BL30, and Blon used whatever case could be found for cheap and would fit the BL30. The headphones are uncomfortable from the moment you put them on your head. The overall weight sits right on top of your head, causing immediate, unremittent discomfort. You must modify the headphones. There's no two ways about it. If all you do is bend the headband, then you've improved on the original design. But in order to get a proper seal, you'll need to get angled ear pads. And eventually, you will replace the headband, either with the expensive Deconi option or something marginally thicker than what Blon randomly threw onto the headphone. Blon does not make any meaningful promises about the sound signature. Consequently, I cannot say that they lied about how these headphones would sound. But the BL30 has absolutely nothing groundbreaking. Their thick, muddy, sometimes distorted sound might be pleasant for you. If you enjoy the Cos Porta Pro or KPH30i, if you like reduced treble, then the BL30 might appeal to you. Indeed, but for the muddy bass, the BL30 has competent performance. Vocals are natural and full. Treble is smooth and inoffensive. Soundstage is average. Detail is average at best. This is the type of performance you can get from plastic headphones which cost 1/4 the price of the stock BL30. This brings us to value. The BL30 is quintessentially a Blon product. Where build and comfort are concerned, the BL30 is half-assed, thoughtless, unfocused. Whether you like the sound signature is a personal preference, and since Blon didn't make promises about the BL30 having amazing detail or the widest soundstage or clarity, I cannot hold them accountable. My real issue is with the build and fit. This headphone could be a positive experience, but it is held back by the design. This was my point when I reviewed the BL-03 and 05. When you have to spend more time and money to get the product to work properly, then you've lost the value argument. The BL30 is terrible value. It offers nothing unique. Well, that's not entirely true. It is uniquely frustrating to use. In all the countless headphones I have used, this is the first where I was required to forcefully alter the headband, the only one where I felt compelled to use replacement ear pads immediately just so that I could get the headphones to sit on my head. I can think of a few reviewers and Blon fans who might defend both this company and its products. To those people, I have just one thing to say. Those of you who make excuses for Blon's products, you all seem to be very forgiving with other people's money, other people's time, and other people's patience. Maybe to some people, buying more accessories to make a Blon product work is a worthwhile investment, but you are not the majority. Just think about it. If you are inclined to buy the BL30, then you will have to deform the headphone so that it fits. Then, if you want improved comfort, you may want to buy ear pads and a headband. Add another $100 approximately to the original price. Now your total cost for the headphone plus the upgrades is over $200. Do you know what else you can get for around $200 or less? Well, here's a partial list. The HD6XX, Cos Porta Pro, Cos KPH30i, Sony MDR MA100, Philips L2, Philips M1 Mark II, Philips SHP 9500, Philips X2, FIO M3 Pro, hibi R3 Pro, Shanling Q1, Bear Dynamic DT880, Marshall Monitor, AKG K361, AKG K371, Bass Audio G12, Bass Audio G7, and countless Chinese IEMs. I have all of these products. Not a single one has the build issues of the BL30. How is it possible for Blon to screw this up so perfectly? Blon has the tenacity to claim that the BL30 has no fitting issues. Who exactly were their test subjects? Chinese Oompa Loompas? Look, if you bend the headband and get the headphones to sit properly on your head, you might like the sound signature. Maybe you can justify the headphone because of its fairly cheap price. I have no doubt that some will be very happy with this headphone. I also have no doubt that some who buy accessories for this headphone may still believe they got a great bargain. You are entitled to feel that way, and if you like what you bought, then you should be happy with that. If you are thinking about buying the BL-30, just beware. You may end up pouring more money into the Blon money pit. You could end up enjoying the product, but be prepared to spend more money and time. As far as I'm concerned, the BL-30 has an agreeable sound signature. It is pleasant and can be perfect for some people. But I am unforgiving of Blon's continued lackluster attention to detail, their careless, thoughtless design for comfort and fit, and their heavy-handed reliance on hype to sell their products. I cannot recommend the BL-30 for anyone who is on a tight budget. Those who have expendable cash, well, the BL-30 might be a continuing project worth your time and money. For the average consumer, someone who is more concerned about value, the BL-30 should be avoided like the plague. For hardcore audiophiles, you people can probably justify any expenditure, big and small, and were you so inclined, you could probably justify the BL-30. For experienced audiophiles who simply want a product that works, I suggest you think long and hard before buying the BL-30. Maybe Blon will release a second version of this headphone with the necessary improvements, but Blon's track record is not promising. I personally like the sound signature of this headphone. I just cannot excuse the failure in construction. I think I wasted my $100, and I hope nobody else does.